Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and with Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
Very good, very good. And super excited that we have a new guest this evening, Frances Akinde, or known as Frankie to her friends, she tells me. So welcome, Frankie.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
No, it's really exciting to get someone on who we sort of want to meet, really, because I think Emma and I both had this thing. We saw your article that you wrote in Schools Week, and we're always looking for people who are doing the real job, you know, and in the thick of it, and trying to branch out and talk about special education. And you had this fantastic headline for your piece, which said something about this year getting into good trouble became necessary.
Yeah.
I just thought, I want to talk to Frankie about what good trouble is.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Tell us a bit about yourself. Tell people about your context and kind of how you came to maybe kind of writing that.
Okay. So as you said, I'm Frances Akinde. I'm head teacher of Riverdmeade Special School, which is part of Riverdmeade Inclusive Trust in Medway. And I've been in education for 20 years. I count it by, the age. My twins are 19. So I was pregnant with my twins when I did my teacher training. So that's how I remember how long I've been in education for. So I started off as a mainstream art and design teacher, and then I was made head of department in my first year. And then ever since then, I've just got more and more into special education and needs, worked in alternative provision for 7 years as a Senko and assessment centre leader, then moved into local authority work as a specialist advisory teacher, back to mainstream for primary, and then eventually where I am now to secondary special. And I absolutely love it. I think I'm so passionate about SEN, and I don't know why. I think it's just something inside that drives me to make sure that every child that I teach or who are in my school get the best education they can. And I think that a lot of the time, learners with autism, like in my school, or with other difficulties, complex needs, sometimes they just get written off and people think, they can't achieve what they do. And we're very proud of the fact that we're one of the only special schools that do GCSEs and offer that full range for our learners in year 11. So the whole title around getting into good trouble was from John Lewis. And at the time, he'd just passed away. So that was really on my mind. On my bookshelf, where have I put it? I've got March here. I was pointing strategically. I saw some of your podcasts and everyone always picks up a book and says, yes, I'm reading that. So that's about... So I've got my pile ready so I can say, yes, I'm reading that and give you a good quote, even though I haven't maybe read the full details of every one of them. But I saw the previous episodes. I'm like, I've got to do that and just show a book. So, so the title was around that because I think, especially as a Black educator, sometimes you feel like you have to put yourself above, just to show people that you exist sometimes, and you don't always get that recognition that you should. And I'm very passionate about a lot of things. And sometimes I feel like, oh, I've said that and I shouldn't have. But I'm trying to be more confident in saying, you know what, that's something I'm passionate about and I have to fight for that. So when it comes down to equality, equity, more importantly, I've always had my children the whole time I've been in education. I had my eldest son, who's 21 now, when I was doing my degree. And, and then for some reason I thought it would be a good idea to have twins while I was doing my teacher training. So it's just always been like that. And I think a lot of the time, I've got 5 boys now, and a lot of the time people hear that and go, oh my gosh, you've got 5 boys and you're a head teacher and you're doing this and you're doing that. And a lot of me, there's a drive there to prove to people that you can do that, and I've always had that support from everywhere that I work at to say she's got the potential, let's push her to the top of where she can get to. And I'm very grateful for that. But I'm also mindful that education is quite a closed environment. Not everybody gets those opportunities. It seems to be that everybody knows each other. So sometimes an opportunity comes up and it's quite closed. So I'm really passionate, and especially, International Women's Day today, about lifting people up and just trying to look at people's potential and pushing them to the top of their potential, really. So that title was just about that, just making sure that everybody gets their right to reach the top of their potential, whether that's a student or whether that's an adult. So, yeah.
Well, that's a great, it's a really great answer. And it's something which, you can tell that it's something you're passionate about. It's like, Twitter's just a one way of platforming your thoughts, isn't it? But there you have it. It says, Frankie, hashtag I broke the bias.
Yeah.
It's like, it's right in there. And I think that, is that something you feel like you need to say to sort of platform yourself to people, or is it just because you're sort of saying, yeah, I feel proud of that, and I broke the bias?
Yeah. I think the hashtag this year was break the bias, and it was really interesting because I was having like a Twitter debate. I try not to get into Twitter debates, but there's a lovely lady on there called Penny, who is from the BayMed network, and they've been such a massive support to me over the years, and just in terms of networking and seeing people like me. And we were she was saying that, we shouldn't be saying break the bias. We should be showing how we've helped people to break the bias, and get to the top of where they need to be. And I kind of said, well, I'm proud to say that, I've broken the bias, because I'm somebody that people might have a lot of bias against, because I'm a mother, I've got a lot of kids, and, a head teacher, being, Black and everything else. So it was something that I felt really proud to say, actually, I'm here, I've broken the bias, I'm getting to the top of where I want to be, and I'm very ambitious, and I find it hard to stop, really. So I just really wanted to show that to other people, to say sometimes it might seem like you're not getting the support you need, or your circumstances are challenging, but there's always a way to reach your potential, really. So, yeah.
Well, we've had this discussion before. Your whole thing of the flex and then being an SLT person and through, so that must resonate with you hugely.
Oh, massively, absolutely massively. And from my own experience, when we set up the co-headship, everybody said, you can't do it. It's not been done before. We were like, well, there's the gauntlet thrown down, if ever I have.
Exactly, yeah. As soon as someone says that, you're like, I'm going to do it, then.
Yeah, very much so. And it's so important that people see that there are different ways of doing things, so that the broadest range of people with the widest range of lived experiences are in front of our children saying, this is what you can be, this is what's possible, you don't have to be a certain person to do that certain thing. It's open to everybody. And I think it is so important to challenge the status quo and to challenge historical models about everything on so many levels. But what I really wanted to ask you about was your work with the Academy of Women's Leadership, because obviously it's International Women's Day, and I know who's behind the Academy of Women. And I love her.
yeah. She's brilliant. She's so good.
Yeah. So what's your involvement with the Academy? What's been the journey you've been on with them?
So I think, when you start off in any position, and, we're getting really good about talking about imposter syndrome and not using that anymore. And I've always found a course to help me feel more confident. So if someone talks to me about something, I was like, right, I'll find a course about that, so that will raise my confidence in it. And, I found Diana's organisation when I became a head teacher, and my organisation is really good at coaching. But the coaching we had was quite external, and I really wanted to find something that was external and with women that looked like me and had gone through the same experiences, that I could share some of my challenges with in my first year of headship. So I was really fortunate that my CEO, Tina Lovey, she agreed to pay for that for me so I could have that external coaching. And it made me feel so confident, because it was a check-in with people where they were saying, right, if you come across this difficulty, this is what you do, and you've got a whole village really of people, champions, you know, that are saying to you, yeah, you can do this. And, you know, these are the experiences that we've had, and sharing that knowledge. Because for someone like me, I don't come from a background where I've got anybody in my family that work in education. So I haven't got that role model. You know, I remember, Tom, you were talking about your wife being in education. She nicks your books sometimes. I didn't have anybody that I could kind of turn to and say, what does this look like? You know, can you help me with that? And also in terms of, there seems to be this thing around Black leaders where if there's more than one Black leader in an organisation, there seems to be some sort of jealousy sometimes, or people aren't always working together. And I find that a problem, because we should be lifting each other up. But that's some of the experiences that I've had in the past. So it was really nice to find an organisation of women that were just empowering each other and saying to each other, yes, you can do this, and yes, we'll support you with that. And I was really fortunate, because as part of that offer, you get a coach as well. So, you know, they call them giants, which is just amazing, you know. And John Amici, isn't it, that talks about, his book is absolutely brilliant when he's talking about giants. And you do need those people that have come before you that can help you on your journey. So I chose ex-Paralympian Liz Wright as my personal coach. And then we had the group coaching sessions. She was just absolutely brilliant. She's moved to Australia now, which is a shame. So I might have to have some virtual coaching sessions. But she just really made me think about my background and myself and my identity. And she's very much into positive psychology and things being values driven. And we had such a good talk about our character values and what that means to us. And she really helped me to think. The big question that she asked me, and I ask everybody, is how does your inner and outer align? And that question took me about a year to answer, because it is just about joining yourself together, you know, and making sure that the person that you present on the outside is truly how you feel in the inside. So it was just so nice to have such a diverse group of women that were just championing you. So yeah, that's how I found it. And it has made me really grow in confidence.
It's fantastic, isn't it? So it's great to hear that. I mean, from my perspective, you see these things happening, and you know, you're aware I'm aware of Women Ed, and the fact that today is, you know, International Women's Day is fantastic. But because I'm someone who sort of swims in the sea where things are sort of are set up for me, basically, and that is the world I'm in, and that's just, you know, you have to check your biases and your privileges and everything. It's just really fantastic to hear that that's not just a sort of. It goes beyond sort of tokens. It's really sort of empowering, and it has a definite, like, real world impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you know, there's something someone's always taught me, is that, you know, words without deeds are dead. And, you know, after George Floyd and, you know, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, everybody was so quick to put up banners and hashtags and talk about diversity and equality and say, Black Lives Matter, we really believe in this. But then when it comes down to it, is it tokenistic, or are they actually doing something, you know? And that's such an important question to ask any organisation. When it comes down to it, what are you doing for Black and Asian and ethnic minority people in your workplace, and for women in your workplace, you know, to empower them, all these marginalised groups that don't have access to the table, you know? And like you said, Tom, in your position, it's thinking about how can you be an ally to people? How can you empower them and lift them up and just give them that exposure to things that they may not experience? And that's the most important thing for me. I mean, my CEO, I never, ever thought about becoming a head teacher. And it was such a strange story, because a TA I worked with at the time went on holiday to Mexico and met my current CEO on the beach, you know, and she was talking about her school and said, oh yeah, we've got an advert out for a new head teacher. This was in Mexico, you know, we're in Kent. And she said, oh, I've got somebody that's in my school. I know she's looking for a new opportunity. She'd be great. And she just kind of rang me up and said, have you thought about headship? And I was like, no way. No, I don't want to do that. Not at all. And she said, you know what, let's have a conversation. We ended up you know, sitting in Morrison's with my current CEO and my director of school improvement, just having a coffee and having a chat. And she said, this is something that I really think that you can do. And, you know, they did it properly. They had like a whole organization that was working for them with the recruitment and everything. And gosh, I remember seeing the advert in TES and thinking, right, you know, I've spoken to them, I've had that conversation, I can do this. But at the same time, I felt, again, like I said, I always do a course. And there was a course on becoming a head teacher. And it was like a 2-day course. And I just did it over the weekend. And it went through interview techniques. It went through all kinds of crazy exercises that they do, like is it called the goldfish bowl and all that kind of stuff to really stress you out. So it was just, it was just like a practice. Yeah, it was horrible. It was but because we did it as a practice, and I managed to find the course. I think it was like the weekend before my actual interview. So everything I did in the interview came up. And, you know, it really makes you think, because not everybody has those opportunities to do things like that and practice and things like that. So, you know, I got to the interview, it was 2 days, and it was like everything that we practiced, it was about data. And I was just like, oh, why have you got a coffee machine? Get rid of that. Why are we spending that money? Get rid of that. And that's what they liked about me, you know, because I was like, I'm not spending money on that. That's ridiculous. But and then, you know, I had to do the in-tray exercise and the observation and things like that. And the goldfish exercise was just crazy because, you know, in our trust, they put all the head teachers, they gave them all these characters, and they obviously didn't tell me and the other candidates. So one of them had to be blow the budget and the other one had to be scary and all this kind of stuff. And we had to go in with a scenario and then talk about it. And then they had to respond in characters. One of them said, oh, don't worry about the money, just spend it, you know. And I was like, what, are you sure? And there was something about assault and all this kind of stuff. It was crazy. And I survived. Say that again, sorry.
That's on an interview. I mean, that is quite extraordinary to have those characters played out.
Well, I mean, I told them never do that to anyone again. I said I was ready to walk out because I thought you were all crazy. So they've promised me they won't do that to anyone again. So
do you think if your CEO hadn't reached out and sort of through your TA, you wouldn't have applied?
No.
You needed that. Come on in, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, it's such an important point because jobs aren't advertised necessarily in the places where everyone should get exposure to see them. So like things like the Voice newspaper, which is, you know, a Black newspaper, you don't routinely see adverts in there, you know, and, you know, we're down in Kent, so you don't see adverts in London encouraging people to come down. And one of the things that my organisation always say to me is because I'm there, people feel safe, you know, and people want to come into my school because they know that they've seen someone like me. If something happens, they can talk to me about that, because that's the reality of being an ethnic minority in a very white area, that sometimes you do need that support when things happen. And I've had people before who've said that, you know, they're not sure whether the area is right for them and things like that. And I've managed to talk to them and say, look, these are some of the things that I've gone through. So these are some of the ways that I can help you. And that's really important, that you're open to have those conversations. So
I think it's what you say as well about that, the importance of action and continuing to take action as well. Because in your Schools Week article, when you talk about how you then became involved in the NAHT's work and that you challenged Mr. Zahawi directly. Just explain that little part of the journey as well.
So with some of the instances that have happened to me in Medway, I really wanted to kind of like have a network around me of head teachers that had gone through some experiences that I could talk to. And in the best will in the world, people around me that weren't from that demographic found it hard when I was explaining to them, I think this person's being funny with me, I can't tell what it is, this person's not respecting me or whatever, and having that conversation and getting to the bottom of, is it because of my race kind of thing. And I found the group, I contacted NHT in the summer, and they put me in touch with the group Leaders for Race Equality. And I didn't know anything about them. I didn't even know they had a book out, you know, You Are Not Alone. And it was just so lovely to find a network of people that had been through those experiences and who were all senior leaders that were talking about their difficulties as, you know, Black and Asian and ethnic minority leaders, and talking to each other about that. And the group chat is just brilliant because you just can put on there, this has happened. They're like, oh, try doing this, and it's not always about race or, you know, issues around discrimination, but it's just nice to be able to have that chat. So they put on there that, you know, they were doing their policy conference in London and that he was going to be there. And they said, does anyone want to ask him a question? And it's the same question I ask everyone, you know, when I get the opportunity to meet them. So I was really fortunate with my trust. We got to meet Gavin Williamson, and you know, at the conference I got to meet Amanda Spillman as well. So I just wanted to ask him about that representation, because I know how hard it was for me. And if somebody hadn't seen that potential in me, I would never have gone for an opportunity like that. And I found it very interesting because, you know, I asked him the question and his response was very rehearsed, because you have to kind of, you know, let them know what you're going to ask a few days in advance. And, you know, it was funny because when we moved away from the camera, he said, I completely get what you're saying. You know, all these issues that we're seeing in schools where people aren't seeing people to look up to, it would make a massive difference if there was more diversity in leadership in schools. You know, you're talking about schools in London where sometimes you're up to 60-90% of the school population is non-white, but then the leadership team is all white. And then, you know, the kids are talking about an issue and talking about things that they're passionate about, and people just don't get it, you know, and they misconstrue them, think, you know, just think things that they shouldn't think really. And they're not open to a conversation about what that looks like. So I really was hopeful that after I'd spoken to me, he was really like, yeah, you know, we're going to do something about this. We're going to, you know, start something. I'm going to get in touch with academies and get them to think about their demographics and things. And nothing, it's been silent, really silent, which is such a shame. There is one man on Twitter called London Heads. And I have to say, he contacts every single academy group in London and gets them to tell him all the information about their demographics, about their leadership team, and he'll put it on Twitter and he'll say, you know, this trust, they've got no Black or ethnic minority leaders. This trust, they haven't got any either. And it's kind of shaming them into doing something different. And there are some trusts where he'll say, you know, like Arc Learning Trust, and he'll say they've really tried, they've really made an effort, and he will praise them for that. But that's a really difficult conversation to have, isn't it? And I think people don't realize the value of having such a diverse leadership team, you know, sometimes. And I just don't get it, because it's such a positive, and I don't understand why people aren't more open to it.
I think this is so interesting. I mean, I feel like, you know, there's a whole, you know, where does it start kind of question. I'm really fascinated by this because, I mean, I do go to schools. I do a lot of work in Haringey, and I do go to some sessions. And to be honest with you, I see more, especially representation of Black teachers specifically in Haringey than anywhere else I ever go. And you go to do a training day in a school, and you think representation here is really, you know, strong. And then other areas of the whole country where you just think literally every single person in the whole place is white, and all this sort of, it's very variable. But where does it start? Is it because not enough people are coming into teaching, or is it once people are into, they're not promoted and they're not being given opportunities? Is it both, or is one of those things stronger?
I think it's both. I think it's about exposure, isn't it? And, you know, in a lot of organizations, it's quite, everybody kind of knows each other, you know. Education is quite a closed environment, quite a closed profession, and people seem to have connections everywhere. So sometimes, you know, you might go for a job and you find out, oh, actually somebody from the school's already got it, or their mates got it, or something else. And it's so disheartening for people. But I think it starts from the bottom. I was very fortunate in my education. My parents couldn't afford to support me with my education, but I was so determined to do it. And you do get to a point where you think, you know what, should I just give up? Is it worth it? We're not getting enough got parents into schools as volunteers, as role models, enough, teaching assistants that we're supporting to get their degrees and become teachers, because a lot of people from my demographic can't afford that. They're trying to support their family. They're not from a background where they've got parents or family that can help them. And then it's just building up that confidence as they go up and up to say, yeah, you can do this and we're going to support you with that. There isn't enough of that happening at all, in my opinion. And it does start from getting people in and exposing them to the education system, and also getting them to rethink their experiences of education. Because, I was brought up in, North London, in Finchley, but my parents lived in Harlesden. And they were like, there's no way you're going to school in Harlesden. At the time, it was known as the gun capital of Europe. So they were like, you're not going to school in Harlesden. There was loads of us that just used to get the 260 from Harlesden, spend an hour on the bus and go down to Finchley because the schools were much better. But the schools didn't appreciate that. I remember going to college and them saying, well, they're bringing down our demographic, they're bringing down our results, because you're getting these kids that are coming in from Haringey, Islington and all those areas that didn't fit the area. And it was so difficult to push yourself through that and just kind of make something of yourself from that kind of background, because it was always people getting blamed for things, that really they weren't involved in. And it might have been, the black girls were a bit louder or something like that. So it was automatically you're a problem. So you end up fighting from the beginning. And I was very, very fortunate. And I'm a great believer in assessments. And I know a lot of people aren't, but I think sometimes when you rely on teacher assessment, there is a lot of bias there. And I did very well in my year 6 assessments. And I remember starting in secondary school, went into the class with my best friend, who was blonde and blue-eyed at the time. We were both thought we were in set 1. So I walked into the classroom and they looked at my timetable and looked at hers and said to me, you're in the wrong class. And I said, but it says set 1. And they said, no, you're in the wrong class. You're not in set 1. And they looked at hers and she was in set 3 and mine said set 1. So they eventually had to say, okay, she's here, because my assessments had shown that I was clever enough to do that. But from year 7, it was a fight to stay in set 1. And eventually I was moved down to set 3, set 4, and then I wasn't allowed to do my higher paper in maths. And I had a friend who lived in Islington, and her mum came into school and kicked up a fuss. She was just like, you're discriminating against her. You need to put her back in top sets so she can do her exam. Because at the time you could only get a D if that had happened to you. And if I didn't have her fighting for me, my parents were like, it's your fault, you're being lazy, you're not trying, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't true, but I just didn't have the energy to kind of argue with them, because that's what they were being told. And it's just always been a fight just to say, you know what, I've earned it and I should be here. And I have the right to, to progress to as high as I want to. So I think it does start from there. In primary school, academically, Black children do well, but that bias exists that as they go through the system, they just don't follow that trajectory that they should do, So it's a lot of stuff going on.
Wow, so much to unpack, isn't it? God, there's so much to think about, including the whole technical assessment aspect, because that's been raging, of course, with all the tags and CAGs over the last 2 years, the teacher assessment coming into the formal exam system. Yeah. So you returning to exams, and I want to talk to you more about your school in a minute. But I mean, this is just you've just got it in it's deep in your whole experience, isn't it? You just can't separate yourself from that, because that's what you've been through.
Absolutely. I think as well, there needs to be so much more vigilance by people in positions of authority as to who's making up their organisations as well. I know in the trust that I work in, we've set up an equality commission group with representation from across the trust, from all levels of responsibility within the organisation, around the 9 protected characteristics, and we meet regularly and we analyse everything from staffing structure to attitudes to working patterns to what's in the curriculum to how we work with communities and families. And that multiple viewpoints feeding into driving the work of the trust. It's so straightforward, but it's so powerful, because if you've got a particular one particular demographic leading a team and leading multiple communities, you have to have that degree of vigilance and communication with the communities that you serve. I mean, and a colleague of mine, Halil, he set it up that I sit on the board on the advisory group, and mine's maternity and parenting. Surprise, surprise. But
why can't he have that one?
He's the chair, he set it up. But yeah, we've got that representation, but it's such a simple process, but it is so in terms of feedback, and it's completely changed the way that we work, and it's provided that safe space for people to air their views about, this is how I perceive I'm being treated, or this happened, let's talk about it, how can we make it better? And unless you've got those systems and that vigilance around that, things won't change either. So
absolutely.
It's so important about that action bit. I loved what you said about that. It's just, what was it? Dead words, wasn't it?
Words without deeds.
Words without deeds, that's it. But sorry, Tom, I digress.
I feel like we could, just talking about, diversity, inclusion, and this whole, breaking the bias thing. I think that we could talk about just about that. But I mean, I also want to talk to you about being the head of a special school. And I don't know if one of the people I've met through Twitter and other things is Helen Ralston, who's the head at the Rise School in Felton, which is another school for autism. And I've been to visit that school. So I sort of have in my head a sort of a sense of what it might be like. But it'd be interesting, because what took me by surprise was just how varied the needs of children are when they sit under the umbrella term autism. And then you do have GCSE groups, and you've got all these sort of sensory rooms, and just so many and people with these sort of hugging jackets, these sort of because they want that feeling,
weighted blankets,
specialist kind of things. And it's like, wow, to be involved in that whole aspect of education must be quite challenging, but kind of incredibly rewarding.
It's amazing.
Give people a flavour.
Yeah, it's such an amazing environment to be in, because our children, our young people, you just think about all the biases that they've had against them and all those things that they've overcome, and the fact that some things may seem like really small steps to other people, but it's a massive step. The fact that they haven't been to school, we've got a learner who hasn't been to school for 3 or 4 years, and we worked for over a year to get him back into school and make him feel comfortable. And it's small steps like that. If he was in a mainstream school, it would have been his attendance is too low, he's not coping, so that's the end of it. And we've had to fight and fight and fight. And sometimes, against advice to say, no, this is what we're doing with him. And things like that, it's so rewarding to have that. But at the same time, there are so many challenges, because local authorities, they haven't got the funding, they haven't got enough places for children that need it. Mainstream schools aren't equipped because they're not getting that support. And sometimes you're working in an area where special schools and mainstream schools are not working together. NACE and Send Gateway are such a fantastic organisation, because they do a lot of work around special needs and making people aware of some things. And at the moment, they've got some, I think it's on YouTube actually, where they're talking about how special schools and mainstream schools can support each other. Because if you're in a mainstream school and you're presented with a child with really complex needs, your first thought is, I can't support this child, there's no way. But why doesn't that child have the right to be in mainstream school and get the full education? What is so difficult about managing their needs? And sometimes mainstream schools are just too big. And for a learner that's got a high level of anxiety, which, a lot of the time with autism and associated difficulties, there's a lot of anxiety around that does affect your working memory. And they find it really difficult to be in a classroom with 30, 32 children and manage. So in our school, we've got really small classes. So we've got 12 learners in a class. It's set up like a secondary school. So they wear full uniform, they go to different lessons with different teachers. We've tried to do that to make them feel like this is the offer that you're entitled to. We've got specialist teachers, they all do GCSEs. but you will notice that the children are different from the ones that you would typically find in mainstream school. I mean, I had a meeting with a learner the other day, no, my lesson actually, because I still teach art year 7s. I absolutely loved it. And he sat there the whole time with his teddy bear. He still did the work. You know, we were doing a PowerPoint on Art Deco, and he sat there, did his work with his teddy bear. There's no way that he would have survived in mainstream secondary school holding a teddy bear in his hand, you know. You know, you walk around the playground, and there sometimes I'm just like, I've got one learner that just shouts Jeremy Clarkson after me because he knows it winds me up, you know. And things like that you couldn't do in mainstream school, and he knows it just really winds me up, so he does it. And it's that understanding about why people are doing certain things that sometimes people don't get. So it's such a unique environment, and I really love the fact that our learners feel confident that they can be themselves, and we support them with that, and we try and expose them to as much as possible. You know, we're always taking them out. You know, as I said, I'm doing a project on Art Deco. So I said to Mike, let's go out. We're going to find some Art Deco buildings in Medway. And they were like, yeah, we found some, let's go. So we've organised a trip in a couple of weeks to go out, because a lot of the time they don't go out, you know, and we get a lot of difficulties with online safety, because they might meet people online and they think, oh, this person's safe, and they can be quite naive about people's intentions. And you have to say to them, that person isn't your friend. That person doesn't want to be your friend, and they're using you somehow. So it's very complex in that way, because sometimes you might be talking to a learner and think they get it, and they really, really don't. So yeah, it's such a special place to be in. And I call our staff, you know, superheroes, because they just go above and beyond for our learners every single day. They are just such special schools. I mean, everyone in education is just amazing, but special schools, the people there, they just get it, and they're just amazing people to work with. So yeah,
it's so true as well. We've got 2 special schools in our trust, Keyham Lodge and Millgate. I don't know if you know them. They're 2 on the same site, primary and secondary, special provision for children with autism, but they're also one of the DFE behaviour hubs as well. And so their work has enriched the work of our mainstream schools so much. We have learned so much from the work that's going on at Keyham and Millgate, and the staff there are, like you say, they are absolutely next level with their understanding of the nuanced needs of all of the different learners, how to support children. And like your school, they do GCSEs as well, and it's absolutely phenomenal, the provision there. And the mainstream has got so much to learn from linking with you know, provision in special, because it's just so fabulous. And so I'm listening to you just smiling. Absolutely, it's they are superheroes. It is fantastic. And it just makes my heart sing listening to you.
It does, and I'm so passionate about it, because they're just amazing. My learners, it doesn't matter what you're going through, and you know, obviously we've been going through COVID for the last 2 years, and there was all this rhetoric that schools are closed, and on Twitter I was like, we're not closed, we're open, we're a special school, all our learners class is vulnerable, we're in. And it's just getting people to understand that, you know, that people have been there on the front line day in, day out, trying to make things as normal as possible for our kids, and making sure we give them the best education that we can. And they just always make me laugh and just make me smile. They do things and you're just like, what? Oh gosh, I can't tell you some of the things they get up to, but they just make me laugh so much. You know, they're just so brilliant, honestly.
It's great when you hear, so I mean, and you're obviously part of a trust, and where schools are part of a system. And I mean, it's one of the things I kind of regret for my last school was leaving there interrupted a really lovely breaking down of barriers between our school and the special school on the same site. When I got there, it was like the fence was up, the doors were locked, and it was all like, don't talk to them. Almost literally, I was told on my first day, oh, we don't talk to them, literally. Like fighting over territorialism over the shared building and everything. And I was thinking, you know, why are the doors locked? Why do we? And there are times where you needed to, but other times where you think, well, when you had the beautiful times where the students could integrate, and you had the sort of, and that every so often we created these lovely moments where there was like organic integration, and of course there's sort of social issues and you've got to prepare children and so on, but it was the ideals of trying to create a kind of a space where everyone in the community feels we're all in it together.
Absolutely.
Like, trust, do you get your students chance to have contact with mainstream, and is that kind of integration possible?
No, we don't really have contact with mainstream school. I think because of the anxiety around it, and we don't have a secondary school within our trust. And we were trying to do a partnership with another mainstream school so that we could share good practice around that. But the local authority are kind of, they're not as innovative as we are as a trust, and saying, you know, we need to work together and share good practice, which is such a shame. And one thing I've never understood is why it's not compulsory to do a part of your teaching practice in a special school. I've never got that. It doesn't make any sense to me why that isn't a compulsory part of teacher training, because it's not like you're going to go to a mainstream school and not find children there. And, you know, we always say what's good for children with SEN is good for everybody. You know, you might not have I would say a lot of children, when I was in Bexley, my job was to go round and look at children that had suspected difficulties in mainstream school and kind of put, you know, some information together for our educational psychologists so they could do a full assessment. And I was just shocked so many times when I saw a child not being included in the classroom, when you could see that they had difficulties and you could see that they had those needs, but the teacher was scared because they weren't equipped to deal with the presentation of a child. Sometimes it would be easy things, you know, like I'm very passionate about questioning in the classroom and, you know, making sure you've got the 5 W's up in the right order that you can use as an anchor to open up questioning, especially with speech and language. And it was just amazing the amount of mainstream teachers that didn't know those basic methods sometimes. And I just don't get why there isn't more collaboration between people, because it's good for everybody, you know. I don't get it.
Well, I can see, I mean, I totally agree with that. I spent a term, it's one of the, I refer to it so often because it was such a formative thing for me when I was a supply teacher for a year, sort of in between moving into London and trying to get jobs in London. And I did a whole term in a special school, Wood Lane Special School in Hammersmith, and I taught age 5 to age 16, and I learned so much. One of my favourite memories from there was a boy who, we were reading the Twits, Roald Dahl, and I started reading it and with them, and he knew the next line every time, and I thought it was uncanny, and I was thinking, you know, how has this happened? And it turned out that he could barely read, but he had it on audio, and he'd learnt the book off by heart like a song.
Yeah.
And he kept on giving the story away, because I would read a story and he would and then he would say the next line. It's like, and it was exactly right. It's
Exactly.
He had this other way of functioning in the world, which was quite significant. I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Like, you can't make assumptions about kids. You've got to get into their space and try to.
And you know what you said there is really important, because that is, to me, why assessments are so important. When I worked in alternative provision, the amount of children in that provision that couldn't read and write, it was unbelievable, you know, and they got all the way through secondary school. They'd got up to year 9, and the demands have been placed on them for GCSE content. They're entering secondary with a reading age of 5 or 6. And that hasn't been remedied in primary school. And then they're expected to sit GCSE papers that they can't access. The amount of children that would just have a fight because they'd know that that would get themselves excluded, or they'd play up because they know that if the teacher asked them to read or look at something, that would cause them anxiety. So they would just act up and get out of the classroom. And there isn't enough work around secondary schools looking at the underlying difficulties around a child's behaviour, not just labelling them as a child that doesn't want to learn. You know, there's so much, again, to unpick around that. And I remember having a boy in alternative provision who just used to leave voice messages for people. You know, people would ring him or text him, and he'd leave voice messages for them because he couldn't read the text that they were sending him. And you're like, this child was in year 10 at the time. And I taught him how to read, you know, and we just had the 100 high frequency words up in the classroom. I got him a series of books that was around, you know, social issues and things that he could relate to, but that was in the language of like a 7-year-old, so that he could access that. And that really started his love of reading. And you get children like that, and you just think, how has somebody managed to go through the whole education system and that hasn't been picked up? You know, how does that happen?
It's one of the assistant heads at our special provision, lady named Nim Sudra. She taught in mainstream before she moved into special, and she's often said to me when I'm working with her, if I went back into mainstream, I would be a completely different teacher, and I would teach in a completely different way. I would never teach a mainstream class the same way from my experience in special. So I was just kind of getting towards the end. It's just, if you could kind of articulate, what would you want mainstream teachers to know or to be able to do? A bit like Nim, when she said, I would never teach like that again. What's the way that you would like teachers to teach in mainstream?
I would like them to, you know what, the most important thing to me is relationships. You know, when you've got a child in front of you, it's so hard because you've got so many demands as a teacher, but you have to build those relationships. And if you're struggling to build a relationship or find something that you've got in common, you have to talk to someone else that does get that child. One of the first things that I do for all new members of staff is they have to do a visual profile. They have to do a PowerPoint all about themselves. Every learner in my school ribs me about Arsenal because it was on my visual PowerPoint. And one of my kids that has got a high level of anxiety, he was non-verbal until about 2 years ago. And he said to me, Miss, you really need to give up, you know. And I got really worried. I was like, what do you mean give up? Are you okay? And he said, you know, I know you're optimistic and I know you try and be hopeful, but you need to give up. And I was like, give up what? He goes, supporting Arsenal, and it's not good for you.
Well, you know, I could probably agree with that, you know. But anyway, but honestly, it's so. I feel like it's been a wonderful thing. It's so lovely to meet you, Frankie, and so the passion just comes through the screen, and it's brilliant. And I really know that people are listening to this on the podcast are going to want to know more about you and follow what you're doing. So I just want to say a massive thank you. It's been a real honour to
thank you.
What a joy! What an absolute treat today. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate that.
All lifted up and inspired. It's like, yeah.
And I didn't have to mention any of these books that I've pretended to read here either, which is great.
We got your to share. So look, we have to finish there, but it's been a real joy. Thank you so much to Frances Akinde, to Frankie coming on the podcast. It's really great to talk to you. So this has been
Thank you.
Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington and Emma Turner. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.